I do remember the first time I met Paavo, which was at university. It was a very drunken night in our student bar, and we saw a band that we mutually loved that were my friends at the university. Paavo got introduced to them that night, and we ended up going to a bit of an after party and sharing some music, and Paavo seemed to be into it. And I had a little studio in my halls of residence room, didn't I?
Yeah, that was the thing that I think we immediately realized, is that just a year before you, I'd had the same setup. So I was making electronic music in the halls of residence in a room much like yours. And I think that was like the first thing that we realized, that we were very aligned in our thinking and what we wanted to do. And I think that's how we hit it off.
Just before the summer of the first year at university that I met Paavo, I can remember bundling all my gear from my tiny room at university into a taxi and sort of combining studios with Paavo. And we had what felt like at the time quite an amazing setup together, and that's when we wrote the track Anjunabeats Volume 1 and decided to start working together.
Jono and me were both studying sort of music business and production at University of Westminster. So as part of my university degree, my major project was setting up a record company with Jono, and we would have done it anyway. It just made perfect sense. And
so we're a university project.
Yeah, really.
and still going.
And funnily enough, that was like the practical component of the degree, and then my theoretical and written part of the degree was the impact of the internet for the music industry. And this was, before social media. But I was already in the 90s fascinated by how internet is going to come around and revolutionize music. And my sort of conclusion in my thesis was that, we are going to move into a situation where wherever you are, you could listen to any song ever made. And then the problem is, how do you find the music that you like? And I didn't have an answer. It was like an open question.
And at the time, I think Napster was starting to build up as well, which kind of half answered that question, but it was obviously an illegal way to find your music that people at university used. And meanwhile, while Paavo and I kind of got together and started working on music together, I was doing sound design for Yamaha, and Tony's brother had bought a product that I'd made and got in touch, and happened to mention that his brother worked in the music industry. And we got in touch, and we went out to a club night in King's Cross called Bagley's, which was an amazing club, wasn't it, Tony? We had a brilliant night out. Matt Derry was DJing at the time, I think, that night, wasn't he?
Or he was there.
He was there partying anyway.
Remember.
But it was, we had a good time.
I remember the beginning of the night better than I do the end.
As is often the case. Yeah.
To be honest, it's funny, I'd forgotten what they were like back then until I was doing some research for the redo of our first ever DJ set in Tokyo, and looking through some old holiday videos, which luckily included the trip to Tokyo with the two guys, and our holiday in Ibiza before, which was these two guys, me and my friend John Barker, who, unlike me, knew how to DJ, and Paavo brought to Ibiza an entirely, complete vinyl DJ setup with speakers and a mixer and 2 record decks, piles of vinyl. There's a very amusing shot at the end of the holiday of Paavo dragging all of this drunkenly over the pavement at the airport, trying to get it back on the plane. And it's fascinating watching the two of them, because obviously this is before Paavo stopped drinking. So Paavo's whole character back then was very different. Jono was a very kind of comedy, not a comedy character because he's all a serious side, but was forever doing impressions of Dave Pearce and all, lots of other people that we'd met in the music business. So I guess that's probably what you were like back then, but I can't remember.
It was Graham Gold.
Graham Gold, yeah, and Judge Jules and a few kind of imaginary characters that we had. Dave Doubledecks was the most impersonated character on that holiday video. Dave Doubledecks, we're
When I was DJ, all right.
What are you going to do? We're going to go and pick up Paavo's mates. What are you going to do?
Well, I think I'll stay here in the pool. We've got a lot of cold water here, which is great for cooling off in this hot weather. You can catch me between 6 and 9 every Friday on 95.8.
And it was those people that went, the three of us that went to Tokyo and did the first gig for Avex. It's actually really lovely when you watch the thing through, which I haven't done for 20 years.
It's hilarious.
Looking at the three of us on holiday and then seeing us all in the DJ booth, and it's like, it's the same people.
The venue is alcohol-free and you cultivate in that barrier, which is brilliant because it means the crowd are going to be 100% naturally high. In Julian Stag, not really northern. Can't wait to get on the gates. How are you, Paul? Very, very much looking forward to this. Correct. It's absolutely healing and living. This lot are very much. The vibe is great. Great. Really positive.
It was such an adventure for us to take a video camera, because back then you couldn't video with your phone, you just weren't able to do that. So I had this crappy little JVC video camera that recorded on cassette. And I'm videoing us in the DJ booth and we're sort of shouting and screaming, and it was a lot of fun. I think right at the beginning there was the thing that struck me about remembering it all. There was no clear plan to do anything other than what was immediately in front of us, and that for us immediately when I met Jono at Bagley's was to do a remix of this track Time to Die that my brother and I had worked on. And then he turned up at my house with Paavo, who I didn't know that he was working with at the time. And the two of them sort of set to work remixing my track in my little studio with my JP8000, which they were very excited to use. The great things about my job at Warner's is it kept changing depending on what I was enjoying doing. And in '95, thanks to my brother, I got into clubbing in a sort of major way. And I started going out to clubs and staying out quite late at night. And most of the other A&R men from Warner, so I was marketing director at the time, most of the other A&R men would come for the first sort of hour and a half and then get a bit bored and go home. And I'd be there till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning. And I started hearing tracks and signed a couple, and they were both hits. Hysteric Ego, Want Love, I think got to 19 in the UK. It was a hit in lots of other countries. Got to number 2 in France. It only cost me $2,000, that one. And then I signed another record that was a hit, and then I was working with William Orbit on his classical album. And around that time, my brother and I started experimenting with making music at home, and then that's where Jono came along. But it was, I think, within half an hour of them being at my house and seeing them operate the machinery that I was sort of still struggling and learning to understand, I was like, they're so much better at this bit than I am, I'll just let them do that bit.
So when we had the first studio at Paavo's place, and then I think Paavo got kicked out. No, actually, this is before you got kicked out of your house. Yeah. Because we moved it to the university at one point. They kindly let us have it in a basement there, which is where we did stuff like the IUM remix, I remember. But before that, after Paavo's place, it then moved, or we moved some of it at least, to the house I was living in with a bunch of other guys who were great musicians and put up with us making banging dance music in a shared house, which was great. This was during the Chakra remix, actually. On the wall, we had I had a printout that I'd taken from Alta Vista, the search engine of the time. I typed in my name into the search engine and found this really funny page about this American motivational speaker. And at the top of the page, it said Above and Beyond. And when we were coming up with a name for the remix of Chakra Home, Tony pointed at the wardrobe, this horrible old wardrobe that it was stuck onto, and said, Above and Beyond, that's it. And I was thinking, oh, is that a good name? And it stuck, and it was a great name. So that's how we came up with the name.
I'm working at Warner's. She did an album with William Orbit, then she did this other one with this Merway guy, and there'd been a couple of singles, and I heard What It Feels Like for a Girl with that little speech in the middle, you'd love to know what it feels like to be a girl. And I thought, God, that would be a great, remix for us to do. And we've been doing remixes for other people. We had a show reel with, Adamski and Chakra and Fragma and other people on it. So I went to see Madonna's manager in LA when I was over there working with William Orbit. And I said, here's our show reel. We'd love to do What It Feels Like for a Girl. And she was like, that's not the next single. You should do music, or I can't remember which track she wanted us to do. I was like, no, this is the one that I really want to do. So then I spent the next maybe 5 or 6 weeks convincing all of the other marketing directors around Europe that What It Feels Like for a Girl should be the next Madonna single, and succeeded. And then we did the remix, and she accepted it, and Madonna loved it so much she made the video to it. So it was a bit of a favour, I suppose. She said, you can do it, if we like it, we'll pay you. If we don't, you know, we won't. And I was like, well, that's fair enough. I knew that we'd be able to do a great job on it.
Well, Anjunabeats as a label name actually goes back to, you know, my high school times in Helsinki. I met a guy called Jussi in high school, and we were like the techno Jussi and techno Paavo at high school.
You used to have a MIDI. When I met Paavo, he had a MIDI lead as a belt, so that's why I laugh at that.
So Jussi and me started going clubbing, and very soon met this guy Jonas. So there's 3 guys. And we ended up going clubbing a lot together, and then ended up having a music studio together and playing some live shows together and DJing together. So this is really my sort of early times with electronic music, and Jonas and Jussi were there through that whole period with me. So my old buddies and me were all really excited about India and Goa specifically, because around this time, there were very few places where different kinds of electronic music would blend, and people from Detroit and Berlin and London would meet. So in the 90s, Anjunabeats especially was a legendary place where all these amazing producers from around the world went there to have these famous full moon parties, and it was like a melting pot. A global melting pot for different styles of electronic music. So when we were trying to figure out with the name for a record label, Anjunabeats was such a cool thing that Anjunabeats seemed like the absolutely amazing name that it was and has become. And we actually never really did much with Jonas and Jussi with Anjunabeats. It was just a concept that we didn't really do much with. So when Jono and me got together and we were thinking like, okay, well, let's do a record label, let's release our own stuff. What should we call it? I think that's when we were just thinking, hey, what about Anjunabeats?
Yeah,
because it's a cool name, but we never really did anything with it.
Paavo suggested the name Anjunabeats, and I was like, that sounds cool, let's do it. And you know, those kind of decisions in your early 20s are just like, yep, tick.
What other options were there, though?
There weren't any. No, and Paavo really, you know, it was sweet because Paavo asked the guys in Finland, can we use this name? And they said yes. And that was really, I thought, even at the time, that was really generous of them to let him and, well, myself as well at the time, use that name, because it wasn't our name, it was their name, and your name, obviously, at the time. And they just let us use it. And yeah, we should really thank them more for that. Once we had Anjunabeats, we didn't have a logo. And the first logo we came up with, it was actually like an A-B kind of thing almost, wasn't it? And if you seek out the original release of Anjunabeats Volume 1, you'll see a different logo on it. But we weren't happy with the logo. And after that, we started playing around with some other options, and we actually found a symbol that we edited to turn into the Anjunabeats logo. So it was actually derived from something else. And you can also see it around London as a certain estate agent, I might add.
Well, I feel like the reason to run our own label was coming partially out of the idea that we knew that it was possible. We had contacts for manufacture, distribution, and also we didn't have that many good contacts to the major labels and to the other electronic labels. So whereas, you know, guys like Matt Derry were like releasing their music on you know, really big labels, we didn't really know how we could do that, but we really knew how we could press up a vinyl and sell it. So that's really our first release came out of that. We'd done a track, we did 2 versions of it, and got it mastered, and I think I think to fund it, I seem to remember we pressed up like 2,000 vinyl, and we calculated that we needed to sell 600 to break even. So given that we had distribution, we knew that, okay, we'll probably make our money back. Anjunabeats Volume 1 actually did really well. Jono and me gave it to Paul Oakenfold in person, and he played it a lot and really helped, make that track popular. And we sold the whole batch of 2,000 vinyls, and with that profit, that was then the nest egg for Anjunabeats to continue.
Yeah, I can remember getting an email from Paul Oakenfold's assistant saying Paul loves the record, and that was our first kind of big moment, I think, when we heard that a kind of superstar DJ of the time was into it, and it felt like, oh, we're onto something, because I think at that point in your career as an artist, you're kind of looking externally for other DJs to play your stuff and to like it. But I think originally the way that we approached setting up the label and starting to do music together was about finding, excuse the pun, common ground musically. And we listened, Paavo and I, to a lot of stuff from Matt Derry, Ferry Corsten, a lot of the kind of trance music that was around that was being played on stuff like Judge Jules and Pete Tong's Radio 1 shows. And that was very much where we got the kind of influences from originally, as well as our kind of musical childhood. And we were like, there were elements of the music that we really liked, and we thought, we really like this bit of what trance is doing, but maybe not this bit so much, and we think we can add this. And it was kind of like found our own sound with it, really, for the first couple of releases. And then we started doing these remixes with Tony, and then that's when Above and Beyond came along and took things really to the next level. And then James joined the company, and we were running as a proper record label after maybe 10 releases or so, I think, and started to sign artists like Super 8 and Tab, who were Paavo's mates in Finland. So it kind of grew very, very organically, and I think a lot of the growth was due to rejection as well, because we would sign certain records like our Ocean Lab project, which was actually the first vocal project we did together before Above and Beyond, believe it or not, because we didn't think it was good enough for Above and Beyond, I seem to remember, which is bizarre, but looking back. But that we would, sign to a major label, but then maybe the fourth single wouldn't do so well, or with other projects like Dirt Devils, the next singles wouldn't get signed to the major labels, and that created a situation where we wanted to release more of our own music ourselves rather than working with major labels. So it was a kind of natural development that Anjunabeats grew rather than working with these third-party labels. So it's a happy accident, really, because we could have ended up signing to a major, crashing and burning, and kind of having a half pop career or something and failing miserably. So I think that sort of little bit of failure that we experienced grew what we have now, really.
Well, if I sort of think of our sort of earlier productions, one of the tracks that has really stood the test of time for me is Surrender, because I remember that when we were doing a lot of these remixes, we quite quickly came up with an almost formula of how to produce an Above and Beyond remix for people, and Surrender was a track where we were experimenting with the arrangement, and to me that made it really be a unique track even till this day. And it also had this kind of, at the same time, energetic and really flowing feel to it, and that's really one of my golden oldies.
Yeah, I mean, same for me with Surrender, actually, and that was actually inspired by a track by Joe Satriani, which is completely different style of music, and I think that's something we've tried to do as Above and Beyond, at least, is sort of bring other musical ideas into the world of dance music, which I think is really important because it keeps it interesting and eclectic. But other releases on the label, I suppose Oliver Smith is an artist that really stands out because he was the first artist we ever signed to Anjunabeats. I remember the first track he did is Aspect, and he had a track called Something Else and Mo Better because it was more better than the last one, which is quite good. But yeah, I mean, there's so many.
I didn't know that.
There's so many good tracks, I think, from that period. Super 8 and Tab Black is the New Yellow, Bart Klassen, 90 Nights of Summer, stuff like that are amazing releases to me on the label. I still listen to them now and I think, wow, they've got a real feel to them. So it's great to sort of have that heritage and tracks of that quality in the Anjuna catalogue, in a sense.
We were still struggling with getting our music played on radio shows that other people were doing. we were very, very lucky with Armin. He supported most of our releases, and we won Track of the Year for I think 3 years in a row on his show until he figured out that it was the list of artists was alphabetical and we were always near the top. So I think that's why we won it all the time. But we could see the advantage in having literally your own media outlet, your own route to market. And Ministry of Sound have been in touch to say that they would offer us a slot. I can't remember if we decided to go on Wednesday or that was when they had a show available. Again, like all these things, it sort of started small. We would figure out what we were going to play. We'd all bang down to Ministry of Sound Radio via Nando's, and we do this radio show. The first few are so funny when you listen back, not only because our voices are probably half an octave higher than they are now, but just because of how bad we were and all the little silent gaps before the jingle got played and all these other things. And we had lots of features that we introduced that never lasted more than a couple of weeks. The erection section being one of them. And, but we were sort of feeling our way. But I think that the thing, as, looking back on it now, were it not for the fact that we had this radio show, that we then quickly, I think it changed, before it changed to group therapy, it very quickly became a vehicle for all the music from Anjunabeats and Anjunadeep and other stuff that we liked. And the attention that it got outside of the media circus of trying to sign your record to a major and trying to get it on Pete Tong's show or Judge George's show or whatever else, and the freedom it gave us to play music that we liked and entertain people for 2 hours with ours and other music and the guest mix and everything else. I think it quickly became a very, very important thing in our armoury. And like the forum which Paavo had designed and implemented, was a way of us communicating directly to our fans without relying on favours or the idea that we would be in fashion, which is what you need to rely on if you're going to go through the mainstream media. Going through Radio 1 or other radio stations. So, and then James really helped getting it syndicated out, and before, I don't know how many FM stations we're on now and Sirius XM, but its value is that we have people's attention for 2 hours, and we can play whatever we want, and that's incredibly powerful.
So I think we started Anjunadeep because it kind of became obvious that there were certain tracks. Anjunabeats was going in a kind of club direction. It always was a kind of club label, and then these other tracks came in that were just not quite fitting on the label. They were more chilled out. And we'd already done a remix of Anjunabeats Volume 1 back in the day called the Anjunadeep mix, which is actually pretty damn quick. I think it's like 136 BPM or something crazy. But it is still quite a deep record. And so that's where the name came from. So with Anjunadeep, we knew a chap called Oscar Khan, who James was friends with, and we kind of brought him on as a label scout because James thought it'd be great to kind of get in contact with producers of that kind of music because we didn't have those kind of contacts so much at that point. And the first release we put out on Anjunadeep was Larry Mountain's 54, as Oscar Khan knew David West. And it's a kind of track with a binary finery chord sequence, so it kind of fitted in well coming out of Anjunabeats into that style.
Pretty much the first 2 years of Above and Beyond, we were making remixes for people. And the way we do remixes is we'd often just use the vocal and write new chords, new riffs. And after doing this for 2 years, we were feeling like we're putting so much songwriting into other people's remixes and we're not getting any of the publishing income or writing credit. So we really need to start writing our own music. The first person that we brought in was obviously Justin Swisser and started a project called Ocean Lab. But at the same time, we were getting into this idea of writing more of our own material and also writing more vocal tracks. And Tony, you were obviously writing a lot of male vocal ideas and things that we were hoping to sort of bring onto our own music. And I guess around that time we started thinking like maybe we should actually write enough music to have an album that we could release.
Well, the first vocal track that we did as Above and Beyond I can distinctly remember the writing session with Jono. I'd come back from a weekend away with a girlfriend at the time, and there was some words streaming through my head. But right back then, although it was obviously written from my perspective, I don't think we had the confidence to actually get a bloke to sing it. We ended up using Kate Cameron, who'd done a lot of stuff with the Space Brothers, who I think stylistically we had a lot in common with. And certainly were great admirers of the work from, you know, Chakra and Ascension and the Space Brothers as well. We were sort of approaching Tri-State and thinking that we needed to do an album, and there were lots more song ideas again that we'd started together. And this guy who was working for us called Dan, who's one of the voices you'll hear in the 2004 Essential mix, had a friend called Richard Bedford who was a singer, and he had I can't remember if it was just the name of his band that he was in, but it had something about silver stars.
When the Stars Collide. It
When the Stars Collide, that's right. Which was one of the lyrics in Alone Tonight, and we listened to it all, the four of us in the office, and we were like, yeah, this is the guy. So we were sort of taking a bit of a punt getting a guy singing a trance song, because all of our peers were using sort of angelic sounding female voices, and of course we were doing the same with Ocean Lab. But I think in some ways that was the right move to make around the first album, because I think the 3 tracks that he sings on the record kind of give it an identity, even though we use different girl singers. There's that sort of stream of continuity through it. I seem to remember us when we were doing Tri-State wanting to do something like the other classic albums that were around. There were lots of other albums that people had done that did certain things in terms of continuity of sound and maybe tracks in between tracks. There was a Time Writer thing that we tried to do. But we really tried to make a body of work that would sound great listening at home from start to finish, and that contained things that we would play in the club. But the idea of making an album that would be great to listen to at home was, at that point, for us quite, not revolutionary, because that's what everybody else has been doing for 50 years. But I think for us in our field was quite a novel idea, rather than doing a mix album, which we'd done probably 4 or 5 of by that time, rather than doing an album of just club bangers, to make it sound, to give it a scope and a breadth and a certain amount of daring in terms of the sound design and the song design and everything else.
The thing with a lot of dance albums is that a dance producer might have a success with a single or 2, and then the record label's knocking on the door to ask for an album. But it's a bit sort of, to coin a phrase from Tony, tail wagging the dog. But really, the great albums have to be sort of made with a greater intention in mind. And I think that one thing that I can remember distinctly when we were making that album is thinking, how is this going to sound in 10 years' time? How is this going to sound in 20 years' time? Actually thinking about that, because it's normally the synth sounds that date an album in particular. So we tried not to use stuff that sounded of now, but was kind of a collection of our influences. And we were fortunate to work with Zoe Johnson on the album. Basically, Tony had heard Crazy English Summer from Faithless, and it so happened that my friend was related to Zoe.
One of the things on Tri-State that always makes me giggle looking back on it was how hard we tried to get somebody else to design the sleeve for us, and talked to a number of designers, Mark Farrow being one of them, and he, within about 4 minutes, kind of priced himself out of the job. But we did see lots of sleeves from lots of other people, and they were all really, really bad. They seemed to ignore the name for the most part. And we were working a lot of time with this illustrator come retoucher called Tim Ashton, who was a friend of Jono's from school.
No, he lived with me. He was a flatmate.
Oh, he lived? Oh, right. Okay, cool. And he was really responsible for a lot of the visual sheen that we managed to achieve by doing all of the artwork in-house. We didn't hire expensive designers. Paavo and I came up with the single sleeve, the 12-inch sleeve, which still is in, I think for me, one of the best single sleeves that the dance music's produced. We managed to make it look great. It was very classy, very simple. The typeface was simple. The back is a bit of a rip-off of a Mark Farrow design for William Orbit, as was Anjunabeats Volume 1, 2, 3.
I think we all kind of wanted to represent dance music a little bit more broadly than people might expect, so it wouldn't just be a kind of banging trance mix, but you had the idea of putting a bit more narrative into it, didn't you, by asking people what they thought.
Because we were sort of in this sort of mode of making Tri-State like Dark Side of the Moon. I watched a documentary on how they made Dark Side of the Moon, and in it they talked about interviewing people in their studio at the time they were making the record, and these quotes ended up on the album, and it gives it, again, it's a weird thing, it sort of helps these sort of disparate songs sound like they're all part of the same story. They do cover a similar, I suppose, emotional state. And so doing an essential mix, which was a collection of our music and lots of music from the label and stuff from outside, we thought it'd be a neat idea to sort of steal that idea from Pink Floyd and interview people in the studio and get them to say what was essential in their lives. That was the whole point, so that we could use that in it. But to warm them up, we asked them this now infamous question: what do you think is wrong with the world? And all this stuff just came out that ended up being really useful. And I think some of it, at a time, because we managed to balance people's views in the mix, we were able to say quite strident things in one direction and another. And I think some of those views really gel with people. The interesting thing about that album, and at least if I'm reading it right, people seem to remember it as being this sort of old-fashioned trance album, when in fact I remember at the time when we were making it, making a very conscious effort to avoid doing a whole album of that stuff. And the music on it is incredibly varied, of varying tempos, but for some reason Ocean Lab has become cemented, I think, in a lot of people's minds with the old trance sound of Above and Beyond and Anjunabeats, which, if you listen to the album, you know, certainly there are moments where it does alight on that sound, but I think that, you know, the songwriting, the music on that album are extraordinary. You know, Justine is still, I think, one of the best writers in our world. And again, like Jono said, we tried to do something that wouldn't date. It you know, uses more sort of classic pop sounds than it does trance sounds of the day. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's endured. Yeah, Justine's songwriting, I think what she does really well is sort of really personal stuff. And her voice is the way we tend to mix her voice is quite direct as well. So I think it has a good connection with the audience, partially because of that as well. Yeah. But yeah, it was a great project to do.
Well, we obviously had our first ever show in Tokyo, which was a nerve-wracking thing for us all. But quite quickly, we found ourselves playing a lot of club shows like Gatecrasher in the UK. And when we started doing more international touring, one of the things that we thought we'd do is shoot a little video that would show what a global thing we are, because we were going to all these incredible places.
Hi, I'm Paavo.
I'm Tony.
I'm Jono, and we're Above and Beyond, and we're here in Goa to celebrate our 100th release on our record label, Anjunabeats. Cheers, cheers.
And it just so happened that this was around Christmas, and we were offered a New Year's show to play to about 1 million people in Rio. So we would shoot in Goa and Rio. We did do this. Obviously, we didn't realize like two places are pretty far from each other. It's not like the best routing if you want us looking fresh on the video. But it was a really amazing week and a half, because we were obviously first on the beach in Goa and then went to Rio to just see this incredible thing happen.
We're on Anjuna Beach in a lovely little restaurant having some lunch. It's Boxing Day.
Our label is finally coming to its 100th release, and we decided that we're going to organize a party on the beach in Goa. We played lots of very small clubs around the world. We played some beaches. But to come here just to see the scale of this thing, it's just fantastic.
We choose Above and Beyond because, in our opinion, it's the new phenomenon in the electronic music.
I remember the time of doing the big gig, how exciting it felt. It felt very different within a few days when we were back on the normal tour of Brazil and playing, you know, Wednesday nights in front of 60 people. So, you know, the elation and the kind of capping of all the things that we might have thought it was up until the week before very quickly became part of the reality of touring, you know, which is that we were schlocking around the world and have been for 15 years, playing to as many people as we could fit into a week. It's funny looking back on it now, I have no memory of what we played. I don't think we wrote down what we played. I can remember the gig and feeling that people were very far away. There was a sort of VIP area in front of us.
It was a long, thin strip, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, but literally, as far back as you could see were people. I mean, it was absolutely mental.
Hi, I'm Jono.
I'm Paavo, and we're 2/3 of Above and Beyond. We're here at Electric Daisy Carnival 2010.
I can remember touring the USA, and there was a point in the music where we almost started playing stuff that had a bit more groove to it. So it kind of still had the trance melodies and chords and everything and the emotion, but mixed with that was a kind of chunkier, funkier groove. And this was around the time we started working with Andrew Bayer, and also artists such as Ilan Bluestone came on the label, and it was kind of dubbed Trance 2.0, wasn't it, at the time, which was, I mean, well, you can pick it up from there.
I dubbed it, yeah, stupid. No, I think it was something I said in an interview for Radio 1, in a sort of atmosphere of paranoia that, you know, they didn't play trance anymore, and by calling it Trance 2.0 we might stand a chance of getting a playlist for Sun and Moon or whatever else. But actually it's a stupid title because, you know, by that time it was probably Trance 56.0 or whatever. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I remember hearing there was just a lot of slightly slower, very chunky, techie stuff that we were starting to incorporate into our sets. Roland Klinkerberg, stuff like that. I remember Kai and Albert particularly being right out in front of that sound.
Going to the big Trance Around the World 300 party here.
And I remember I had to invent a new label for it in my CD wallets. I called it Chunk. So there was trance and there was chunk and there was prog. And the number of records that I got labelled Chunk just started growing and growing and growing and growing, and it was real fun to play. It was a little bit slow, a little bit easy to dance to. The whole world seemed to be, well, not the whole world. I mean, you know, we make records that fit with other people's music. So the way the world moves, we're like a flock of birds. We all started slowing down, and that process just kept going.
I think the thing is, when you're working at 138 BPM, if you think about the maths of it, there's less space between the beats. So there's less room for groove. And then when stuff dropped down, it started around sort of 134, drifted to 132, and then sort of found home around 128, didn't it? But there's a bit more room for kind of groove the slower you go, which was kind of nice. But it does influence the kind of chord patterns you would do a bit, because obviously a lot of the tracks that we were doing at 138 BPM, they started at 69 BPM or half the BPM that we were working at, and then they kind of doubled up to 138, and that doesn't happen so much. I think around 128 you kind of tend to write it at 128-ish, or give or take a few BPM, whatever.
Andrew Bayer came to the label at the start through a band he was in called Signal Runners, and I think that we put out a 2-track EP from Signal Runners, and I remember being struck by just how beautiful and musical the two songs were, and we very quickly started a relationship with Andrew which continued after Signal Runners came to an end. And I think his sound changed a lot after his first album. He put out an album on Anjunabeats which was nothing like the club tracks that he was making us, and nothing like anything we'd ever released on Anjunabeats at the time. And I think that sense of adventure and musicality that he brought to that album was, I mean, not a shock to us. I think we all knew just how talented he was, but it was a surprise to the label in a way. And I think one of the things I've always loved about Anjunabeats, from Stefan J. Cruz to Andrew Bayer, is we're able to release stuff that feels right to us, even though it's not strictly in the genre of music that we're known for. And I think that's a great place to be. It shares a heart and an atmosphere and a soul with Anjunabeats, but it's not necessarily the same BPM. And Andrew was very quick to discover a world where he put beside him whatever, tempo we were working at the time, and started doing 90 BPM stuff and lots of side chain and lots of sound experimentation, and worked with some incredible singers like Anna Brun from Norway, who we did a remix of and formed a relationship with. But it's great that when you've got artists that are as innovative as he's been for us, because it stretches everybody else.
Yeah, in a sense, it's fun to take Anjunabeats where it's not been already, rather than where it is already. And I think, artists who are wanting to sign to the label, who do get signed, are kind of going there and taking us there, aren't they, already?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the one thing that when you're doing A&R for as long as we've been doing, people may send demos in that sound like stuff we put out before. There's no point,
Yeah,
You
it's already there.
Yeah, you want stuff that sounds like stuff that you've never heard before. That's, and I think with Andrew and with Matt Zoe and lots of other guys on the label, that's what you get.
But it was a really exciting point in the label, because I think we obviously started doing club vinyl, and then when we moved on to doing albums, it also got musically so much more interesting, because we almost like we're talking with the guys and pushing people to be more experimental with the albums and making them more like kind of what we've done with Tri-State, where it's a thing that's really interesting to listen to. And I think at that point it sort of felt like Anjunabeats was really standing for quality music, things that we are proud to release, even if they didn't necessarily make perfect sense in the club world per se.
So Matt Zoe, I can remember being this very young kid from London who was making music far beyond his years. There was a remix of his that we were playing, and we decided we've got to get some music from this guy on the label. Couldn't believe it when we discovered he was, 15 or 16 or something at the time. And I feel like he really brought a new sound to Anjunabeats, because he has a lot of what London does musically somehow in his music. You can really hear a lot of black music in his music, not just a sort of pure trance sound. And we've got a lot to thank Matt for, because he brought new sounds to Anjunabeats that we may never have had, the artists that followed on from that without Matt Zoe. I can remember when Artie came through, and Paavo and I were doing a gig in a club called Queen in Paris, and we opened with one of his remixes. This guy had basically, in terms of Trance 2.0, as Tony coined it, this guy sort of almost defined the sound. It was a lot slower, but it was really, really musical and melodic. Artie brought a lot to the table, because he kind of reinvented part of that trance sound for Anjunabeats as well. Another artist who really influenced a lot of artists that followed.
Group therapy without knowing it when we were working on the Ocean Lab album, because Sun and Moon and Thing Called Love were written for that album. But we had demos that we had done for Tri-State that didn't make it, that we could reconsider. And we were doing an awful lot of writing and recording at the time. I remember spending a lot of time in Jamestown studios working on tracks for group therapy. But the big thing really, I suppose, for us was that the first album had done so well and was so well regarded that we'd sort of set the bar very high for the second one. And I think it was a very stressful time. We thought a great deal about every single track on that record, and whether the groove was right, and whether it should be in the old style trancey thing that Thing Called Love ended up being on the album, or this new Trance 2.0, whatever you want to call it, like Sun and Moon. And there was a lot of soul searching and heartache going on about that. And I think maybe out of that troubled gestation came, I think probably people would say, our best album. I think we had a lot of great material, and I think we thought so hard about how it was going to be presented, we ended up doing a really, really good job.
Yeah, I can remember, working on stuff like the club mix for Sun and Moon. I feel like that mix caught a wave of what was going on right then in terms of the groove. It had a bit of trance because of the riff, but it also had quite a techie kind of groove to it. and a really kind of in-your-face vocal. It didn't have much reverb on it, and we were really playing with stuff like that. And I think that gave that record the edge, and it was evident in some of the other tracks on the album. So yeah, it's definitely an album I'm proud of as well.
I think we'd also, through our relationship with Zoe growing, had sort of got to this point really with group therapy, where, if I'm not wrong, it's basically either Richard singing the blokey songs or Zoe singing the girly songs. We didn't have a, you know, the range of the number of singers that we had on Tri-State, and in some respects, I guess, as a listening experience, it feels more cohesive in that way.
Having already done, I think we'd done 2 albums really, because we'd done the Ocean Lab album and we'd done Tri-State. We were really always looking for, you know, at the same time, the club tracks, you know, the big tracks, and then, you know, things that will help the album. And one of the things that we'd be messing with is a lot more like, you know, film scoring and ambient things. And one of the tracks, track called Sun in Your Eyes, that ended up on the album, was almost like an experiment into making an extended trance breakdown in the original tempo. Could you make a whole track without drums, but still have that sort of big feel to it? And I remember that it wasn't really even intended to be played out at shows. It was made for the album. And then when we started playing it at the shows, it suddenly made sense. And I think
it's a great set closer.
Yeah, that sort of thing sort of helped us to kind of think about the DJ situation a bit differently as well. Like, actually, this works. We can do whatever we want. It doesn't all have to have drums.
Those tracks that Paavo was talking about, really important, because they're the kind of glue on an album, even on Tri-State as well, to be honest with you. Tri-State is a very ambient track that opens the album. We've tried to put that in every album, really, where I think too much of anything is not good, and you know, having those little breathers in the album, and they can be some of the most special moments in the album when you have something without the drums. You know, then when you do go back there and go a little bit clubbier or more electronic again, it's more of a lift. So they're really important on the albums. I can remember after our group therapy album, people were talking about Trance Around the World, the radio show, as their weekly group therapy. And meanwhile, we were getting some criticism as well that some of the music we were playing wasn't trance, and you know, other tracks that we were playing on Trance Around the World, yeah, they probably weren't regarded as trance. And we felt like it's quite a restrictive thing to just say you are this one thing. And so we ended up with a new name for the radio show, which was Group Therapy. And it just gives a little bit more mental freedom to kind of play whatever the hell we want, really. And without so much judgment, I think, both internally and externally. And actually, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think the music that we played changed that much. People say it did, but I mean, we didn't intentionally decide we're going to start playing house music or we're going to start playing techno. Some of those tracks creep in occasionally, but the core of it is still kind of trance, really. But it just allows that little bit of internal flexibility, certainly for me anyway.
And one thing that we've obviously been doing with the radio show is have a guest mixer. And I felt that at the point that we changed the name from Trance Around the World to Group Therapy, we could invite people like Sasha on the radio show, because there were a lot of people that weren't necessarily just trance that we were really excited about, and we're able to then get them as guests on our radio show.
It's not every day that you get invited by Above and Beyond to do something rather strange. So, welcome. Does this break any records or constitute, you know, an entry in the Guinness Book or something?
I don't know actually, but for us especially, it's kind of like really pushing some boundaries. Obviously, we've been DJing for so long, and it's really exciting and interesting to do something like this.
Are you scared of heights?
I am scared of heights. Yeah.
Some bright spark came up with the idea of us doing an acoustic set in the balloon to some fans and some leading industry figures, and the size of the balloon basket limited that just to one person. But
there were two fans actually, weren't there?
Oh, there were a couple of fans.
But it was Pete Tong, wasn't it?
Yeah. But luckily we managed to get the guy who was then, and you know, maybe still is, the most important dance music industry figure, namely Pete Tong. And we rehearsed for a few days before, and we did it completely live with no backing tracks or anything up. And it was an extraordinary thing to be at, you know, 3,000 feet in a balloon, which is utterly silent because you move with the wind, so there's no wind noise. And then when we landed, I remember Pete saying to me, you know, I think everybody's going to think very differently of you as an act when they see this. Meaning, obviously, that we were a band. We were singing the songs or Zoe singing the songs that she'd written with us, and I remember thinking, there's something in this. This could actually be really valuable if we did more of it.
So Tony had the idea to sort of start this acoustic project, and I think I was pretty scared of it because the idea of, we came from dance music, there are loads of bands out there who are great, and then we're going to go and do this thing where, you know, we present ourselves as a band, but it actually turned out really good, and we decided to basically strip the songs back to the basic chords, melodies, and kind of rewrite them with often new chords, with a producer called Bob Bradley, who's produced all of the albums with us.
Oh, that's nice. Is that an original melody?
Yeah.
Get it in. I'm just there, eyes closed, feeling it.
So I'm just getting into it.
Oh, it's lovely. Some gorgeous bits in there.
Play the track from the start.
Yeah.
Hit record. I'll jam over the top, and then we'll get all out my system. And then we decided to do a string of live shows at the Porchester Hall in London, which was a fairly small venue. And after that went really well, we already had a gig booked in the diary at Greek Theatre in LA. And it just felt like the right thing to do to take that gig across to America rather than do it as a dance show, because also they have noise limits there as well. Everything just came together to suggest, we've done all this work on this acoustic album and show, why don't we just take it to America and go and do it there? As Tony said, we Trojan horsed our way in as a band into the Greek Theatre, and did we do 3 nights?
We did 2 nights.
2 nights.
Yeah, and the second night, Sonny from Skrillex came. Well, Skrillex. Sonny from Skrillex, that's the band. Skrillex came out and played guitar with us, which was awesome.
On the first chord at the beginning. It's the only place it stays on the first chord, which will keep going down.
It felt to me that the first time round we did the acoustic, it was almost like a test to see, like, could this work? Could we do it? You know, how would our fans respond to it? What would it be like to be on stage? And then by the time we'd done those 2 shows in LA, I think we all came out of it sort of feeling like empowered. Okay, this is pretty amazing. And people are getting it. And that sort of left this sort of spark that, you know, we could probably actually do more of these live shows. Maybe we can do more of this music. And that's really like what then led to, I feel like, acoustic becoming a bigger thing in our world. Which
there was a lovely difference between the first and second shows. We'd managed to do the shows at the Porchester Hall and we made people take all their phones or put their phones away, or we took them off them, I can't remember what. No filming, no recording.
Yeah.
So we did these 4 shows which were going to become this sort of MTV Unplugged thing, and when we started them, that was going to be it. There would be this filmed record of us doing it, filmed across 4 nights, but make it look like one show, and that would be the end of it. So then we're in America, or we have these dates in America, so we managed to keep everything from the show under wraps so that people don't really know what to expect. I can't remember the thinking in all of that, but we did the Friday night show in LA at the Greek Theatre, and people came to see something that they knew nothing about. And they came in the clothes that they would come to an Above and Beyond show at the Forum or somewhere else. And there was a lot of talk. People, I think, were sort of not struggling to digest it, but it was like, what the hell is this? And then there were videos that went out on YouTube of it, and then so when the second crowd start filtering in, there are lots of them wearing suits and evening dresses and things like that, and were very quiet and very respectful. But it was remarkable, the difference between, you know, not really knowing anything about it and then seeing it with some knowledge. They were both very great shows. I think one of the reasons why we did acoustic was that playing electronically, which we tried and really tried hard to do well in Beirut in 2008, was such an unmitigated disaster for us. And I think for the fundamental reason that computers play in time, computer-produced music can be very loud, But when you start introducing humans, for a start, they can't play as in time as a machine, so it's going to be worse than what was on the record. And if you play it very loud, you can't hear what you're singing. So the whole thing kind of felt like you either need to mime an electronic show, which is what a lot of people do, and play with the lights and do other things, and maybe add a few live elements, or you need to do it in a completely different way and not try and compete with the sound of the dance records, which are very loud and very perfectly in time. And so acoustic was in some ways a cop-out.
Tune to Group Therapy 100 live from New York City. It's a pleasure to have you with us for this landmark broadcast. Only 30 minutes to go before we take to the stage.
Before Madison Square Garden, we were going through this phase where we were really starting to form a show, and doing Above and Beyond shows was becoming a big thing for us. And we were traveling with our own lighting guy who was doing also visuals, and our tour manager and our lighting guy were really like cobbling together these incredible shows with very minimal amount of people. And then we were like presented with this Madison Square Garden show, which is obviously in its size and scale and meaning much bigger than what we've ever done before. And I see that as a point where with our show, in order to actually make Madison Square Garden physically possible, we only had, one day to load in all the equipment, set everything up, do the show, and it's on such a time scale that I remember we had over 200 people working to make that show happen. And, just 2 weeks before that, we were doing shows with 3 people. So it was that sort of big growing up of the Above and Beyond show moment for us. And I just remember that it was so incredibly well organized. And in the end, the day and the show and everything went so well that at the end of it, I was kind of thinking like, oh my God, we've just done a show at Madison Square Garden, but it didn't feel like an accomplishment because there wasn't a struggle. And that was an incredible thing. But really to be at Madison Square Garden with all those people was just an incredible thing. I think even if there was no music, just to be in that room with all those people had such energy to it. I remember just like walking some of our guests into the thing, and when they saw the whole arena full of people, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It's absolutely incredible.
It was.
When we did the We're All We Need bus tour, I mean, we haven't had many moments, I think we could all agree, where we're like, oh, we've made it, or anything like that. We don't really think like that. We just do what we do. But there was a sense, I think, on that bus tour that we were playing some really special venues, had very, very special fan base, great connection with the crowd. And it was certainly a moment, I think, in our career so far where things really came together.
Pretty crazy crowd.
It was amazing.
Our show, became something more than just the music. It also became about the lights and the visuals. But mainly that the fan base was just mad for it, and every gig pretty much was sold out, and it was a great feeling, to be on the road in America, one of the best music markets in the world, arguably, and to be playing these sold out shows from theatres through to pretty much arena shows. So it was a great moment in our career.
We were hearing from promoters that, we love having you guys over here because there's less trouble. People behave better. There was this kind of inherent respect when people went. Not that people wouldn't go crazy and have a lot of fun, but still the number of problems that people had was a lot less, and people were actually helping other people more. And that kind of thing, I think, really helped it, because it then became that if you go to an Above and Beyond show, you will have a nice time because people are going to be nicer.
Yeah.
And that actually made it nicer for us too, because obviously we, at our peak, I think we were spending easily half of each year at these shows and traveling to and from them. So our whole life was about these shows, and it's been amazing.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Paavo's saying about that. It's so nice to know that people come to one of our shows and they're kind of pre-programmed to have a good time, make good friends, not to break out in fights, all of those things. And that feels really, really special to be a part of that. And yeah, to get that energy back from that audience and to know that it really, through the tougher times of being exhausted on the road and all the realities of touring, it really lifts you up to know that there's a greater purpose beyond just, going through the motions of doing the gigs.
That record was a phenomenon. We put it out before we put out the records that we thought were going to go on the radio, just to put down a marker that the album was above and beyond, I guess. And 5 months later, it was still on the radio and went on to become our biggest radio hit. Whereas the other records on that album that we've been told by pluggers and loads of other people that were going to be big radio hits didn't do as well. It was a very unusual record in that regard, and it was a great lesson, I suppose, when you're working with people at radio and people who take records to radio and they're telling you this record's great, it's going to go on the A-list and it's going to do this and it's going to do that, and here's one that we put out there like, oh yeah, you don't need to worry about that, it's going to go nowhere. And then a year later it's our most played record of all time and gets a Grammy nomination. It just felt like a lovely story about the music business to me. And I personally was very happy to finally get a Grammy nomination because we know lots of other people who've got them. And I think actually because that's the bit of the process that's voted on by your peers is it's as good as getting a win. I think the final between the nominations and the win, it's just basically anybody can vote if you're a Grammy member. So it's more like a popularity contest. It's only famous people who win Grammys. But the nominations are from people within your peer group, and I was really happy that we got one for that.
I also felt like the Grammy nomination was a sign that our kind of team and our connections and our network was reaching that point where people are paying a little bit of attention, because obviously a lot of the nominations and winners of Grammys are big major labels, and there we are on a record that is inherently on a small independent, and getting that recognition, that was really amazing.
So we've been playing loads of festivals across America, and it got to the point where we were thinking, well, why don't we kind of do our own festival and curate the lineup? Because what happens at festivals is you often come on after another artist who maybe doesn't complement your kind of music, or it just doesn't always work so well. So the Gorge was an opportunity to bring basically the Anjunafamily in terms of the artists, and the Anjunafamily in terms of the audience, and bring those two things together and create our own festival, really, wasn't it?
And Gorge, out of any of the venues that we have ever played, is, I think, for all of us, one of our favorites. Not just because of how it sounds, but just actually to be there is already so amazing. And also Gorge is a bit of a mission for everybody to go to. It always requires a few hours of driving at the very least. So that also means that people go there and don't drive back the same night. So it had all these kind of positives, and for me, when we were talking about doing the Gorge, it sort of felt like, could this actually really work? Like, can we actually sell enough tickets so we're not going to lose a lot of money, and is it going to look really empty or anything? But it was really amazing to see that it was such a success, and really, I think for us it was an incredible experience to be part of it, and hopefully for everyone in the crowd too.
For me, the overriding feeling was one of actually finally meeting the Anjunafamily. We do these shows, and we basically get bundled into a backstage room and have a beer, and then we sort of go into the DJ booth, and there's all these people there, but it's dark and you can just about make out the front row, and we kind of wave, and we get 5 of them up to push the button, and then they all go away again, get in their cars and they get in their trains, and maybe we see them on social media, but they're not there. We're not in amongst them. And suddenly at the Gorge, they were there the whole weekend, and we were there the whole weekend, and so you got to look at them in the light, different shapes and sizes and age and the whole thing was, and honestly I found it, I'm getting a bit choked up thinking about it now, I found it overwhelming. I went onto the stage on the Sunday and we were quite tired because we'd been touring before and we'd stupidly done a show the night before in Red Rock, so we only turned up at the day of the show at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then the sun comes up at 5 o'clock, you know. So I'm emotionally drained, and I go up on stage when Paavo's doing his yoga set, and I sort of suddenly see these people, and again, it's literally the first time I've seen them really for any length of time, and they're all sitting there and doing yoga, and some of them kind of wave and everything else, and it was like, shit. There's a lot of them, yeah. It was, and I got teary then, I'm getting teary now just thinking about it, because this thing kind of exists online, really, you know, on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and then occasionally we see a little packet of them here and a little packet of them there, but so many people from so many countries all went to this thing, and you saw them drinking coffee in the morning and not walking their dog, but, you know, living their life, and there we were in amongst them, rather than it being a show situation where we're in and out. And it was awesome. I remember when we drove under the footbridge, or I can't remember exactly the physical arrangement, where lots of people were standing and clapping, again, just overwhelmed, just to see them all in one place, for real, in the flesh, like, you know, in a way that we don't normally do, was incredible. And I really hope we get a chance to do it again.
Quite early on, we realized that we were writing songs about real things that happen in our lives, you know, our high points, our low points, and that actually making this music is a therapeutic thing. That's how the, you know, group therapy as an album name came for as well. And I think there's something about this idea of writing about honest things really directly and honestly, what you know, you and Zoe and Justine have done so incredibly well. And it's been sometimes amazing, you know, that we might write a really sad, heartbreaking song about something, and when, you know, you're at a venue singing to this song with so many people, it sort of releases you from that pain somehow. So I think this kind of therapeutic and music and mental fitness thing has been a part of what we do pretty much since we started. And I think also one of the other things that we've always been for is, you know, sort of intelligent clubbing. So, you know, having the freedom to have a great time without very few limitations, but also being clever about the way that you do it. So looking after your own health, looking after other people, and then feeling free to really enjoy, you know, a good time. So that's, I think, you know, our sort of history with the mental fitness. I'd be lying if I didn't say that touring hasn't had its toll on each of us over this sort of 20 years of being a band. You know, not being able to sleep very well, the pressure of going on stage, the pressures of you know, just being a part of this band and everything. You know, we've all felt them differently at different times. That's why, you know, mental fitness has been an important thing for all of us.
I think the sound of Anjunabeats today is hopefully, if I use the right word, the same as it's always been. I think we put out very high quality, emotional, melodic dance music. And I was very lucky to be, you know, drew the short straw and did Anjunabeats Volume 15, which is, you know, as neat a summary as you can have. And the lovely thing about doing it is, for the first time since I've been doing it, we were able to put tracks from 120 beats per minute right up to 132 beats per minute, and there wasn't a gap. I think we've managed to cast that spell, if you like, on so many different kinds of dance music that fit under our umbrella and that fit together because they have that common theme. I think both labels are in a really, really great state.
What we try to do as A&R people is to make sure we've got a balance of different flavours on Anjunabeats. There's some stuff that is kind of more peak time club stuff, and, you know, that might fit in with whatever's going on for us now in our DJ sets, but there's also stuff for a little bit earlier in the set, or different moods and emotions. And I'm really keen to keep Anjunabeats as a very broad church, if you like, and, you know, as diverse as we can make it in terms of the artists and the sound. And I think that's what the future holds, really.
And with Anjunabeats and Anjunadeep, it's kind of interesting to also realize that we might not even know where the labels are in 2 years' time, because one of the exciting things that we've seen is that every now and then, we get a demo from somebody that almost like redefines a part of our sound.
Definitely.
Sometimes it's something that we've done ourselves, sometimes it's someone who comes and gets signed to the label. But it's really fascinating to talk with a lot of the other producers on the label and people who might want to be on the label, and also like just hear how everybody comes and looks at different parts of electronic music, but somehow we've managed to sort of represent music with like emotional gravity and weight in that way, and really I think we've always wanted to keep the mixing quality really good, and when we were doing vinyl, even then we were paying more to have really high quality product, and I think it's all comes down to the fact that we've always wanted to release music and products that we are really proud of. Well, obviously this has been an incredibly challenging year for every person and every company in the world, and
except for Amazon.
Yeah.
I'm sure they've had their challenges. They're obviously doing really good, but one of the things that was really amazing to see, and it sort of wasn't even clear initially, our record labels are in a really strong and good position, that even when something as crazy big as COVID happens around the world, that we can continue our operations. And really what Anjunabeats and Anjunadeep is an incredible collection of very, very talented, good people. And I think my fear was that, when this is happening and it might stop everything and we might lose our team, which is really what enables everything and runs everything. And would this stop everything that we do? And now it seems to me that our labels can continue and our teams are mostly intact from this, and to me that is an incredible thing to see happen.
For a long time we've been aware of the damage that the human race is doing to the environment, both personally and within the structure of the business. We've made efforts to try and reduce our impact. It's a very complicated thing, obviously, in our scene, because whilst people might point to the damage our flights to the show are doing, the actual show itself and the travel of people going to it is using the Earth's resources too. We were, I think before COVID struck, embarking on a process where we could move to a more sustainable form of touring, but then touring stopped. So I feel that process is something we need to pick up on again when things quieten down, if they do. I think it's incredibly important. Sometimes there are things that are outside the normal sphere of responsibility. Record companies, we make music, we go around the world and play gigs, but actually I think with regard to the state of the planet, it's more important than all of us. And so I think it's quite right that we started to address that, and we've made great strides within the office to make things more sustainable and try and get to zero carbon emissions within the label business itself as soon as we can. Touring, I think, is obviously a much thornier problem, but I think there are other problems with touring right now.
I think in terms of the label, we're keen to keep our roster and make it more diverse, in fact, to reflect the audience that we do have, which is very diverse. And I think it makes for a more exciting company. The more diversity you have, the more great ideas you have in a company. So it's in everyone's interest to go that far, I think.
One of the things that I also have seen over the last, especially 5 years, is that how it sort of felt like the world is becoming maybe more polarized. And I do see music as this kind of uniting thing. And almost the clubbing culture, since its early days, was about the fact that, we all believe in different things, and we might, look very different. But if we go to the club for the music and are respectful, we are accepted. and we can have a great time and we're all equal. And the sort of original Plur kind of clubbing thing is something that I feel like we've tried to keep alive, and I still feel like it's still happening around the time that we did Common Ground. Even the name of the album comes from that idea that let's be grateful for our differences and let's build on common ground. Let's look for that common ground, because as people we share so much more than what divides us, but we put so much focus on the thing that divides us that we forget that we're actually all the same.